Awesome. It looks like we are live. So, Daniel, thanks for coming on, brother. I really appreciate it.
My appreciation to you for having me. It's a real pleasure to join you from so far away.
Yeah, yeah, awesome technology. I love it. I love it. So I thought before we dive into the main topic of today's discussion, which is the book,
Hmm.
which I'm very excited to dig my heels into a bit with you. How do you describe yourself in the world, professionally, personally, however you want to tackle that, just to give some people a bit of a context?
Sure. Well, it depends on the day. I do a bunch of different things, and some days I'm more comfortable with not having a rigid definition of myself. Sometimes I'm jealous of my friends who can say I'm an academic or I'm a doctor. But on the other hand, I think it's also in some ways a blessing. So I usually I start with I'm a musical theater writer because that's what I put the most time into. I guess 15 years ago now, I graduated from NYU with a degree in musical theater writing. I did their graduate program here in New York. So I'm a composer and a lyricist for the stage. I write songs that tell stories that move the plot forward in a musical. You think of your favorite Disney musical, Little Mermaid. Those songs were written by Alan Menken and Howard Ashman. Ashman wrote the lyrics, Menken wrote the music. I sometimes do both. I sometimes do one or the other. And I often work with other people. I've written 5 or 6 shows now. Uh, and that's a career that comes in fits and starts. It takes forever to get a musical made, if it ever gets made. A lot of developmental steps. It's a very collaborative profession, meaning that you're really it's a beautiful thing. But unlike being an author where you just get a book contract and if you're lucky and it's going to come out into the world, you toil away on a musical, then you have to find a director, a music director, choreographer. You have to have a theater pony up and say we want to produce this thing, and that takes a lot of money to produce a musical because there's so many different moving parts. There's the arranger, the orchestrator, the band, the cast, the stagehands, the crew who builds the set, the advertise. I mean, so it's just such a collaborative art form, that, at least in my experience, I mean, they say on Broadway you can make a killing, but you can't make a living. And so a lot of it is working in and around the industry. I've done a lot of different things. I've been a transcriptionist on Broadway shows, meaning that I I help prepare the sheet music basically by ear. I listen to demos of the material and I write out the sheet music. I've got my MIDI keyboard here and I do that kind of work. I've done a lot of different things in that area, and that's been very rewarding and artistically fulfilling. Um, I am a mental chiropractor, which is something I made up. Um, I was once there was a time when I was apprenticing with my father in the sort of ayahuasca space, the psychedelic healing world, and I was at a I'm no longer doing that, but I was at a retreat in Peru, and a participant said to me, "You're not a therapist like your dad." And I said, "Thank you very much," because I'm not pretending to be one. I have a degree in psychology, but I never did anything with it. He said, "You're a mental chiropractor." And I said, "Wow, that's a great
Mm,
term. I really am flattered by that because uh, mental chiropractic, it is what it sounds like. It's that I get in there with people and make a quick adjustment to the alignment of the mind. The mind, just like a spine, is made up of different components that are meant to interlock and work together. And it works best if it's in a particular alignment. And if something is out of alignment, you're going to have problems, either pain or nerve damage or some compromised functioning completely elsewhere in the body. So you could have a lower kind of out of joint, you have a headache or pain in your foot. So in the mind, I think of it as there's your intentions, which often we're not conscious of. We often operate from default hidden intentions that are actually hidden to ourselves. You have conscious beliefs, you have assumptions, working theories, you have values, moral values, ethical values, you have prejudices, You have the imprints of trauma. You have, the emotions that come and go. And it all creates a certain system. And what I do with people, I don't work on the big ticket issues that you'd go into with a therapist, for instance. So if someone comes to me, so for instance, I did a consultation with someone in the Maldives yesterday, of all places. And this person said to me, I'm dealing with addiction and I'm dealing with attention deficit disorder, which obviously are two topics that my father's written about extensively. And I said, well, look, I have personal experience with both of them in my own life. But those are very large, broad life issues that one would need to engage in a course of therapy to get into, as well as the traumatic imprints that underlie them. If you give credence to my father's approach to these things, which I think is pretty sound, I said, is there a specific situation in your life right now where these things are showing up? Did you relapse recently? Are you having a hard time forgiving that? In terms of attention deficit disorder, is there a conversation you need to have with somebody about that to make different arrangements for yourself? And what I was getting at is that I work on specific situations with people. There's a stuck point. The issue is obviously in the background. The trauma is in the background. I take that for granted. We're all carrying stuff. But where I tend to shine is when someone is struggling with this one particular thing. So if you come to me and say, I have daddy issues, I'd say, go see a therapist. If you come to me and say, I'm going to see my father next week, and I just know it's going to go this particular way, and it always goes this way, and I want it to go some different way, but no matter which way I look at it, up, down, sideways, inside out, upside down, I just know that I can't see it going any other way. Well, that's something we can work on. It's specific. So in a way, I coach people to have a small victory, and which is the title of one of my favorite Faith No More songs, A Small Victory. And that band might be before your time. But having a small victory in a very difficult area can sometimes radiate outwards, because what it indicates to the whole system is, oh, it's not set in stone. And if I can have a flexibility, suppleness, malleability in this one thing that seemed set in stone, maybe the whole thing isn't so set in stone. So I in some ways, I deal with it from the outside in, rather than what a therapist would do, which is like getting right to the bottom of the issue and all that. But that takes a lot of time. I don't have the patience for that. And I get kind of result. I'm like, what's the outcome? So I spend an hour and a half with someone, saying we take a walk together. I call it a walking mental chiropractic service called Walk with Daniel, which is at walkwithdaniel.com. And actually, I have them walk wherever they are, and I walk where I am, and we're on the phone. Or if we happen to be in the same city, then I do it in person. And over the course of that hour and a half, or whatever it ends up being, we both set the intention that we're going to get you unstuck from this thing in the next hour and a half. So it's not, I don't treat it like a process. I don't want to get people in the mindset of, oh, slowly over time. That's cool. You can do that work, but not with me. With me, it's like, what are you stuck with? Are you determined? Do you intend to get unstuck like this? Are you ready to be unstuck? And there's a part of the mind. I feel like I'm answering 6 questions at once that you haven't asked, but just when I say mental chiropractor, no one knows what I'm talking about at first blush. So this is what it is. And then, the idea is that with a high degree of intentionality, and basically the person is giving me permission to get in there and make an adjustment. So it's more forceful. We make that adjustment, and people come out of it with a different perspective, and something settles. Ideally, the alignment settles into place, and all of a sudden it's just much simpler. And the person feels empowered to go ahead and deal with it from a different perspective. So that's the mental chiropractor thing. I've been doing that for about 4 years now, and I really enjoy that. I enjoy doing that with people. And now I'm an author too. I co-wrote this book, The Myth of Normal. Oops, tilting. With my father, and I am now all of a sudden a published author. And we have a second book coming out in a few years based on a workshop that we currently lead and have been for about 6 years, called Hello Again, A Fresh Start for Parents and Their Adult Children, which I could talk about if you like. But so, you know, I do all those things. I probably do some other things that I'm not even uh, thinking of, but those three things I would say are how I would describe what I'm up to in the world currently.
Nice. Well, I love that. I feel I can go 100 different ways with that. So that always helps. I c- yeah, I connected. I think what connected with me, with your story was um, obviously listen to the Joe Rogan episode, and I've heard your father speak many times, but he mentioned the situation. Maybe you can extrapolate it of you growing up with him, and I've had similar, not similar. I wouldn't call it similar, but let's just call them daddy issues. But how has that impacted you, and how is this coming together? It seems to write the book forge this new path going forward. Hope that makes
Yeah,
sense. But
it
I feel
does.
like that's what resonated with me, and that's why I wanted to reach out with you. Was that was the
Mm-hmm.
entry point? But then the more I dug into some of your work, the more stuff I found, and the more interested I was. So that's what led me to this discussion. But maybe you can talk to the process of writing the book with your father, and the impact it's had, but also maybe just giving context as to what it was like growing up and how that,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, well, it's been a powerful process. I would say that independent of working with him, I've been on a journey to excavate what the heck happened in my childhood and what, not just what happened, but what was it like for me? Because that's the point. It's not so much the events, it's the experience that the child has and what happens inside the child that leaves the imprint. I mean, we say, or one of the ways I like to frame it, I don't know, probably hockey is not the biggest sport in South Africa, but what I say is that trauma is the concussion, not the cross check. You know, it's the head injury, not the illegal tackle. The tackle is traumatic, but it's the imprint that it leaves, and that comes from the experience. And often once we grow up, we get out, we lose touch, even if we know the facts about our childhood. We had to forget at some point what it was actually like, and that's why it comes back in flashbacks or in nightmares or in or in trauma triggering moments with somebody completely else, you know, with a girlfriend or a spouse or a boyfriend or a husband, or a boss or your kids, uh, and you have that outsized disproportionate reaction to something. And if you know how to look at it right, you can say, well, that's a clue to what it was like for me. That's an echo, you know. So I'd say that my entire adult life, and I'm turning 47 a week today, and has been in some ways a kind of mystery story, a detective story of trying to figure out, why do I struggle the way I struggle? You know, starting in university, I started having depressive episodes, um, and those have continued throughout my adult life, and all kinds of struggles with motivation, self-definition, anger, difficulty in relationships. It shows up in all kinds of ways. Now, I'm in the unique position of having a father who has been increasingly renowned, and by this point, he's internationally renowned for his work on popularizing the view that childhood trauma is what leads to the results, the outcomes of difficulty in adulthood, which for me is extra confusing because, I mean, on the one hand, it's a real plus because there is a language to talk about it. On the other hand, there's a language to talk about it a lot. And so it's like getting the information about my childhood secondhand. I remember when I was 11, maybe, I was having social problems at school, and we were in Chinatown in Vancouver, just having come from lunch, and I was telling my dad about, you know, what it was like for me to be bullied or excluded by people I thought were friends. And he said, well, Daniel, you know, when you were very young, your mother and I were having difficulties, and you know, you were a very sensitive child, and there was an impact on you, and you've always had difficulty reading social cues. So basically, I'm getting my trauma explained to me by an expert, And that's not what you actually want from your father. You want guidance, you want compassion, you want listening, you want an example.
Mm.
So having to climb my way out from underneath the mountain of information, secondhand information, and figure out, well, what was it like for me? And so I'd say in the past 5 or 6 or 7 years, that started to become more, started to have more of an autonomous view of my childhood. My father was a rage filled, pain filled Holocaust survivor
Mm.
who had very little emotional control. I'm talking about in my early childhood. His voice booming out, yelling, stomping around when he was frustrated is something I remember. He was always very articulate about it. So he would scream, "I'm so frustrated," and that was his version of positive, healthy anger expression. And he might have gotten it from a book on, I don't know, primal scream therapy. I don't know what he was into at the time. He's always been into something.
Mm.
And there were parenting books all along the walls. And I remember as a kid going to his bookshelf and like taking down his parenting books and like leafing through them so I could learn his tricks. Learn he and my mom, like I learned what techniques they were going to use on me because I didn't want to be manipulated by these two powerful, really smart people. And I developed a really, really quick, clever, big brain as a way of surviving. So that was my coping mechanism. My parents were both very intense, very loving. I mean, they felt a lot of love towards their children. They had difficulty getting it across in a calm way that I won't speak for my siblings, but that I could really absorb because one of the child's fundamental needs is security, knowing that they're both, not just physically and emotionally safe, but that you come into the world and it's complete chaos and you don't even have sensorially, you don't have a sense of you being a separate person, and then slowly you get sort of long distance vision and and depth perception. You realize, oh, that's mommy and I'm me. That's daddy and I'm me. That's a chair. I'm living in a world of things and objects and laws, like the world works a certain way. And depending on the environment that a child is born into, they're going to absorb a different view of the world. And my view of the world was that it's very chaotic, very tenuous, that the mood in the house can switch at any moment from loving and humor filled and playful to dark, dark, dark clouds and a punitive atmosphere. One where I'm being blamed, one where my emotions are reacted to or my words are reacted to in an extreme way. So it's not safe to fully just relax and be me. Now, unlike some kids who learn to be nice and good and suppress their anger, which is, a type of personality dynamic that my father writes about a lot, that wasn't my coping mechanism. My coping mechanism was to raise up and get more quote unquote mature and pseudo sophisticated in my intellect and in my language so I could out talk my parents at age 5 or 6. And I think my father has said he was intimidated by my intelligence, my sensitivity, the fact that I could see through him. And that sounds like a superpower, but every superhero has a tragic origin story. You fall into the vat of toxic waste, you come out able to bend steel or whatever it is. You get bit by a radioactive spider and you're all of a sudden you can swing from webs. And it looks cool, but there's pain underneath it. So my big brain became a way of coping with it was my navigation system to try and get some sense of agency and safety in the environment. And it sometimes worked. And that's the thing about these personality dynamics. They kind of work. They work better than the alternative. And so we do them over and over again and they become habituated. And then I get to school just around kids who like to hang out and chill and play. And I had zero chill. So then I'm ostracized and then I'm feeling pain about that. And now I'm in this tension between my home life and my school life and, wishing that I could fit in there and feeling like my home life is so weird. So, it was that whole dynamic. And, I'm certainly not alone in that. I'm sure a lot of people listening will relate to at least parts of that. even if they didn't have a famous trauma therapist for a dad, who wasn't even a trauma therapist back then. He was just a GP, a family doctor. So anyway, that's the background of my childhood. And in my adulthood, um, the process has been trying to reconnect with what was it actually like for me, and who is underneath all of that superpower. Like, to reconnect with the part of me that was terrified, or that was furious, or that was really sad and grieving and desperate for love. And because knowing about it intellectually, see, my intellect can only get me so far in terms of healing, because it it came along to protect me from the other stuff, the vulnerability. So as life goes on, getting deeper and deeper into, oh wow, this is what I must have been going through, and then having compassion for that, and then taking my focus off of the externals and the whole narrative and the story. And it's a good story, but the freedom doesn't lie in figuring out exactly what happened. The freedom lies in reconnecting with, remembering. The word remember sounds like it's just about recall, but actually to undismember these parts of self. Someone that we quote in the book says that. I think it's a great formulation. So then, to go back to the first part of your question, what was it like, and what role did writing this book with my father play in that whole process? Well, we had gotten to the point where we could work together, and where I knew that he respected that I provided some value for him, that my skills as a musician, a lyricist, a wordsmith, and a thinker, someone who could see his work from the outside and think, how can I make this more lighthearted, if possible, humorous and accessible, but also more convincing for people who aren't already aboard what I call the trauma train. There's a lot of people out there who haven't thought about their lives in this way, and I want it to be inviting to them, not just people who go to personal development workshops or have been in therapy for decades or do ayahuasca or whatever. So bringing those perspectives, those productive differences between my father and I, and my mental chiropractic inclination, which is to make things really clear just through how you express it in this moment and how you frame it, bringing that to the writing, he basically asked me to join him on the project. He'd been trying to write this book for, at that point, 6 years, maybe even longer, and having a hell of a time of it. He'd compiled 25,000 articles, categorized all by topic on his computer. It was a pretty good, feat of librarianism. It was very organized. And he was very passionate about this, but he didn't quite know how to frame the topic. And then at a certain point, he sort of reframed it. He realized, okay, the myth of normal. He was going to write a book called Toxic Culture: How Capitalism Makes Us Sick, which sounds like a hoot, that's a real fun read. But then he came up with this more positive, interesting, provocative title, I think. And at that point, he got an agent, and he tried to write a book proposal. And my mom read it, and she was like, "Ugh, Gabor, this is really heavy." And it's a slog. And he sent it to me because I had done editing work for him before on The Realm of Hungry Ghosts, his previous book. I had done some light editing and some slight, writing some things in there, but it was definitely, it was more of an editing position than a co-writing position. And I looked at this book proposal and I said, Dad, I can help you with this, but I'm going to need to be credited because you need help. I'd have to really, and not just in terms of the execution, but the structure of it. How do you form the argument? How do you make this interesting and compelling? What's the story we're telling? And as a dramatist, as someone who writes musicals, I'm thinking, what is the story arc? What's the beginning, the middle, and the end? What's going to make it exciting? So I came aboard, and it was a challenge. There's a power struggle at times. And there was a number of dynamics going on. My desire to be seen and appreciated by him, to have my unique contribution appreciated. And at the beginning, he was kind of territorial. It was his book, after all. Understandably, he's been working on it forever. And I would send him versions of the chapters. The basis of the process is he'd write something, he'd send me the chapter, I'd rework it, sometimes heavily, and send it back to him. And early in the process, sometimes when I would send him my version, he'd immediately call me right back and be like, in a very serious way. It was usually late in the day after he'd been working on it forever. He's like, Daniel, your writing is very fine. And this is how when I'm like, oh shit, here it comes. He's like, but this is not my voice, and it's overwritten, and it's this and it's that, And I was like, we had to set up a new rule, which is like, Dad, sleep on it when I send you something and look at it in the morning. Because often what would happen is he'd email me at 11 a.m. the next day. He'd be like, I woke up and read it. It's actually pretty good. I can work with this. And I said, I don't need you to like sign off on my version. Take my version and do your thing to it. And then we'll pass it back and forth, which is what collaborators do, which, as I said, in the musical theater world is a big thing I'm used to and quite good at, I think. I wasn't good at it at the beginning, but my ego has gotten some cross training in that. So we had to learn how to work together, and I had to learn how to not take it personally when that would happen. And what started to happen is that I started to see his vulnerability in a way that I'd never seen before. That underneath it all, he was just anxious and insecure as a creator. And I was like, oh, I can relate to that. And it's not personal to me. And so then I would be more gentle in my approach. I could stop doing my automatic thing of trying to convince him or be right or whatever. And I failed, I'm sure 60% of the time at first, but 40% is pretty good, a success rate. And similarly for him, there was a growing curve. And by the end of it, it was interesting. By the time we were writing the final chapters and doing our rewrite of the whole thing, we were both writing in a voice that sounded very much like a mix of the two of us. And when one of us would take the other's work and rework it, often it was like, yes, thank you. That's exactly what I meant to say. So by the end, there was a huge lane for me to contribute, to write entire sections with his ideas, but me expressing them in the way that the most people would be able to grasp it and get the most out of it. And he would say, thank you, that's great. And similarly, when I would go off on some tangent, he would take what I'm saying and say it. You can tell I'm a long-winded dude. Something I'd say in 4 paragraphs, he'd say in a couple of sentences, and it would be just as good. So really starting to appreciate each other's gifts. And if I had to sum all of that up, you can hear the interpersonal dynamics underneath the professional work, right? Mutual appreciation, me not taking things personally, seeing him as a human being, him seeing me as his equal, but different, seeing me as a grown-up, respecting my feelings and my work, taking responsibility for his own emotions and not dumping onto me the way he had throughout my entire childhood. So in a sense, the professional relationship, the book contract, the mutual project of putting this thing out into the world was like scaffolding for repairing some of the broken dynamics between us. If we had just tried to do that in our ordinary lives, it would have been a lot harder because A, we wouldn't have needed to be talking all the time. We could just avoid each other, avoid the tough stuff. And number 2, why? It's hard. We were comfortable in it. In this case, we have an outside reason to do it, because if we don't work this out, then this book is not going to be, whoops, sorry, I just, your phone again. This book is not going to be the singular, successful, and I say successful, I mean creatively successful, like the satisfying product that we both want it to be, and it won't make the difference we want it to make. So we had to get off it quickly. We don't have the luxury of indulging the hurt feelings and whatever. We had to look for solutions. We had to chiropractor the situations quickly. So that taught me something, that making something more important, and hopefully something external, more important than the old patterns, creates a powerful intention that can then trump the uh, the programming when in the crunch, in the moment. Now not everyone's going to write a book with their father. I don't recommend it to everybody, but setting up some architecture to support moving in the direction that one or two people want the relationship to grow in. It was a powerful experience, and we've come out of it feeling very much like a team. Now, not always. There are still times when we take out our stuff on each other. I've been doing that quite a lot in the past month, which I'm not proud of. I'm curious about it. I'm not, I try not to be hard on myself, but like, why is that happening? And I think with the release of the book, I've been feeling insecure because he's getting all the attention, which he should. This book is his work. Our next book is going to be very much a 50-50 collaboration on the parent-child relationship. Neither of us is more of an expert than the other. Well, he's put in decades of work as a health professional and a healer and a speaker and a teacher. But there's this little boy in me that's afraid that I'm going to be ignored, or that he's going to take, that I won't be seen and appreciated, and that I'll be taken for granted. And when that little boy takes over, all of a sudden I'm in a nightmare, and the world looks very dark and it looks very unfriendly, and he looks like a villain. It's incredible how inside that framework he can actually take on the bad guy contours that I used to frame him in as a child. I mean, he was really, I loved him, I worshipped him, but also he was the monster. I would have nightmares about the big bad wolf, and it was him. So those things, at least so far, and maybe in my next steps of therapy or whatever, I'll get to the place where I can finally put those nightmares to bed, so to speak, and they don't come back. I'm not at that point yet. I'm at the point where I have to manage them, and I have to be responsible for them as an adult, and watch for them and see the signs of them. And when I can't, trust the people around me to see it, and then take the note when they give it to me, like, hey, Daniel, you're slipping into that. And that's humbling. For all the things I know, there's a difference between being intelligent about emotions and being emotionally intelligent. That's what I've learned in the past few months.
Well, I just want to say thank you so much for opening up that and that level of vulnerability. I certainly connect with that on a very deep level. And obviously I'm not co-authoring a book with my father, but everything you pave there, I can relate to a similar experience. And so I just want to say thank you, because that's beautiful. And to hear it from your side, I think adds just that residue of realness that I crave. And I think a large part of my work and the things that I do and the things I'm interested in is that remembering. It's that being a self, and not having my father present most of my life. He's alive, just not present, but is being very much a self-taught human. And I think a lot of things I've had to teach myself, and a lot of that has been the going back. Paradoxically, it's not the forgetting, it's the remembering.
Yes.
And forgiving my father for a lot of things, and a lot of that forgiveness. I recently had a guest, Nathan Maingard. It was a beautiful conversation. I've just released it today, actually. And I spoke about a San Pedro ceremony that I had, and it was the most profound thing. And my intention, you've mentioned intention a lot, and I think that's so important. And my intention going into that ceremony was to forgive my father. And I remember taking the San Pedro and just witnessing me and my father came together, and we locked heads. and I saw my ancestors dancing around us, and they all came together, and I saw my dad's pain as a kid.
Mm,
I saw the
mm,
exact same pain that was passed down onto me,
mm-hmm.
and it was one of the most profound experiences I've ever had. So, but again, I just want to say thank you, because that your story I can connect with, and I love that. It's beautiful.
Oh, you're welcome. And I love that image of that you had in that ceremony. What I love about that is it instantly confers nobility, like an archetypical,
Mm,
like the ancestors are dancing around you, and they're celebrating in a way this battle between father and son. It's not inherently pathological. It goes back, you know, forever. Jesus had a lot of issues with his father, you know. Uh, it's a question of how do we do that wrestling match and what is it for? And um, you talk people, you talk about it's not about forgetting, it's about remembering. When people say put it behind you, what they actually mean is forget it, or don't. Often what they mean is, overcome it, or um, treat it as if it's, sort of change your attitude towards it. Another way to think, I mean, that's cool. If you can do that, my hat's off to you. For me, what put it behind you means is, first of all, recognize that it's not behind you, it's in your lap, it's still here with you. And you have to take a real look at it first. You have to face it, and then gently realize that it actually is behind you. It's not happening anymore,
mm,
you know? So it's like put it in its place, recognize where it is, take whatever, in your carry-on bag you want to take with you about it, because you don't have to reject all of it.
yeah.
There are gifts in it. Um, but don't just try to, I mean, I'm not a stoic. Like, I don't really have a stoic temperament. Um, I have to fully see something for what it is. I have to really excavate it. This is maybe the artist temperament in me. I have to go all the way into it and transform my view of it. And then I don't have to let go of it. It lets go of me. It wants something from me, and it's asking something of me.
Mm.
It's it's bringing me some kind of gift, but it's often, wrapped in a turd. So I have to, you know,
Oh, I love that.
or maybe a turd shaped birthday cake. Um, uh, so I have to do that digging to find the skeleton key
Mm,
inside of it. So yeah, I mean, but again, all we just did with the example of you just, it's not like you saw a vision of peace and love and flowers and your father and you soaring through the air holding hands. No, you saw a wrestling match, you saw a battle.
mm,
But a battle for what?
mm,
A battle between his trauma and your trauma, a battle to understand each other.
mm,
And immediately becomes beautiful on some level. Tragic, sad, difficult, absolutely painful, sometimes brutal. But you know there can be beauty in MMA. There can be beauty in, not that I'm a fan of that particularly, but a lot of people find there's a kind of, two worthy opponents locking horns.
yeah.
You don't have to have positive thinking about it. The question is, can you see it fully, and then can you see it from multiple points of view?
Mm,
I think it's one antithesis of trauma, because trauma it limits response flexibility.
mm,
You're reacting, not responding. I mean, you have only one go ahead interpretation, and that's your go-to, and it's just the automatic way you see it. And when you unfasten that,
mm,
you can see it from that point of view. Like, I can see my dad as a villain. That's one story.
yeah.
It's not a bad story. I might write it that way sometime in a graphic novel, or in a nightmare sequence in a musical. Like, it's valid. That was how
Mm,
I experienced it. That was my subjective reality. But it's not the only view. The other, another view is his tragic childhood and the Holocaust,
mm,
and him being in the grips of a curse, um, or some kind of demon possession. That's another kind of fantastical but still metaphorically resonant. Darth Vader, for instance, right? That's another kind of way of rendering the father son wrestling matches, that you have this creature that's become more machine now than man, as Obi-Wan says, but Luke believes there's still his original essence in him, and he's holding space for his father to transform. And in the end, by witnessing his son's suffering at the hands of the Emperor at the very, very, very last minute, the human being in Darth Vader awakens, the compassion awakens, the courage, the ability to see it differently, to be disillusioned, to let go. So that's another story. Another story is that we're just two dudes, just arguing. Like, it's meaningless. So the more, this is why I love theater, is it gives us, as Stephen Sondheim said in one of his great musical theater songs, give us more to see. And learning to see things from multiple points of view at once, to me, is the essence of freedom, because that's where choice comes in, and that's where flexibility and humor, and I can just relax when I can see that it, to quote another classic musical theater song from Showboat from the 1920s, it ain't necessarily so.
Yeah, that word awaken for me is beautiful. I often think about it, and I like to imagine, the last few years for me have been this discovery of like awakening this inner shaman inside of me. And I know these Swedu shamans and people that, but there truly is, and I guess that goes back to the archetypal view of it, but there is this guide inside, I believe, everyone. And then you sort of lose touch to that. And I suppose that's the authenticity part of maybe what your father speaks about in his work and what you may be
Yes.
used to. What role, can you speak to the role of maybe some psychedelics? I don't know if you've dabbled, and what maybe role they've played in healing, and obviously some
Yeah.
cautionary tales to lead on to that as well. But I'm very interested in the role that they've played in your healing process. And thank you for, and I just want to say thank you for outlining the fact that you still have work, because that really entails a lot to say that, and I found that vulnerability very essential to the conversation itself. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks for that acknowledgement. I mean, given that my dad and I are embarking on, we've already embarked on a project of guiding other people through these parent-child relationships, we'd better be working on our stuff. I'd better be working on my stuff, because to pretend that we had it figured out and have some kind of like, Gabor and Daniel's 5 easy steps to, bullshit like that would be the most dishonest thing we could do. What we're trying to do is, in some ways, model for, maybe provide, explore, wonder about a new language for talking about it, but also model an intestinal fortitude to stick with it if it's worth it to you. You don't need to have a relationship with your parents when you're an adult, but if you choose to, and you're going to have a relationship with them whether they're in your life or not, that's the good news and the bad news. They could die, they could be on the other side of the world, you could be estranged from them, and then they are still right there with you. Psychedelics, I am not currently engaged with any psychedelic work. Marijuana is sometimes has psychedelic properties for me, but it's very unreliable. It's a real trickster. Marijuana makes you think that your every thought is the most genius thing in the world, and the next day you're like, but I have found that if I don't take literally the thoughts I have, then it's interesting to observe what comes up, and I get hunches, I get a little hint or a clue sometimes with that medicine slash drug, and it's very, very tricky because it can be such an escape from life. And this is and also I don't do it medicinally, I don't do it ceremonially, there's no guide, and so then it can easily become this pleasurable escape that numbs you from your pain. In the past, though, I definitely did plant ceremonies. I've done San Pedro once in Peru, and it was a powerful experience. I'd have to say I have a fraught relationship with it because I was married to somebody who was deep in that world and who was actually an apprentice of my father. Um, and I was very mesmerized by this person's connection to plants. And in some ways, I tried to immerse myself in it more than I would have as a way of staying close to her. But
Mm.
what that tells you is that I didn't feel that I was enough.
Mm.
And you know, she ended up with a shaman in Peru. Like it was the most cliched thing. So essentially I got left for that world. But in a sense, I never really fully had her.
Mm.
And I'm not blaming her, you know. Uh so ayahuasca was a world in which I both found myself and I kind of lost myself for a while. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
Um, and this can happen in many different ways for people in spiritual
Wow.
communities or psychedelic communities. That on the one hand, it's a refuge. It's the sangha part of the Buddha's triad of the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, the community. Um, and on the other hand, in some ways, I did lose myself in it. Now, while I had lost myself in it, or it's never just one thing. I got to connect with deep experiences of love, of connection to everything. Of I'd say the biggest thing that the plant medicine world gave me was a sense of wonder, a sense of awe and wonder. And if it did anything for me, it didn't instill any new beliefs in me. Like my then, and we're divorced now. My wife at the time was, I think, had some literal beliefs in the plant spirit world, and many of the people in that community. And my dad was a part of that community too, which made it even more complicated. And the fact that she was learning from him, it was kind of incestuous, but also very interestingly, in some ways, a microcosm of my childhood, in a sense, in ways I won't get into. But um, not that there was literal incest in my childhood. That's not what I mean. But emotionally, yeah, you know, just too much overlap, not knowing enough who I am. But it's not so much that it instilled new spiritual beliefs in me, but it did unfasten many of my unbeliefs, my
Mm.
my 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 fundamentalist skepticism, my cerebral supremacy. It showed me that there are aspects to reality and consciousness that are far beyond the everyday mind can achieve, that the natural world is, the only thing the only piece of art that I've ever seen that really captures this, oddly enough, is Avatar, where you just have this sense that you're opening into a world of a much deeper intelligence, of a people who understand that they are not separate from something much larger. Now, that didn't cure me of my sense of separateness at all, but it gave me experiences that I can never unsee now. They are
Mm.
reference points. And if I bring them back, they're right there with me. But that's my choice to integrate them or to just forget them. Um, it also taught me something about letting go. When you do ayahuasca, you have to be willing to purge. You're not always going to vomit, but it happens, or you purge in different ways, various bodily excretions you have no control over. Um, and learning to encourage, caress, hold my mind in a way that it could feel safe enough to give up the ghost and just let go for a second and trust
Mm.
something else.
Mm.
That's that's a tenderizing experience. That's on the court training, which again, hopefully it makes the muscles around that, the rigid control muscles around our emotions, a little more soft, a little more supple. So it opened me up. Um, but I would say that for me, at a certain point, once my marriage was complete, once the divorce was over, I realized this isn't really me.
Mm.
Uh, and that I'm not called to this in the way that some people are. It's a helpful tool, and I would recommend it to anyone dealing with serious addiction or serious illness, or wants to really, as a friend of mine says, go to the basement, like really get down there and see what's in there. I got to see what's in there. I got to see some really vivid visual metaphors and embodiments of what I'm carrying in me. But for me, I developed a kind of hunger for real time integration,
Mm.
to have insights in my everyday state of mind that I can instantly integrate, and I don't have to make any sort of metaphorical bridge between a different state of consciousness and this one. Like, to me, that's where the action is,
Mm.
because that's where I feel I can most reliably integrate it and learn from it, and where something actually changes, where my ordinary state of mind learns that it can give up control, where my ordinary everyday brain learns, oh, I don't have to see it just one way,
Yeah.
you know, rather than developing a kind of fixation on, a kind of reverent, like a sort of a idealization of, romanticization of the psychedelic state, which a lot, quite frankly, a lot of white people, not just white people, but people in the West, bourgeois, privileged people from the global North and colonial enclaves of the global South, like where you are, um, we're consumers. We consume
Mm.
no matter what. We were raised in a consumer culture. That's not to say people don't develop genuine, humble, indigenous, informed relationship with plants, but it definitely goes against the grain of our upbringing.
Mm.
And so I just am wary of that for myself. But I still consider it, like many modalities that I've done in the past, not psychedelic, but different, personal development styles that I'm no longer doing. I have the highest esteem for it.
Mm.
I'm just at a place in my process where that's not what's going to forward things for me,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And that takes,
Um,
yeah, that takes, it takes a lot. And I just want to, what you mentioned is finding yourself to lose yourself. That was, that is so, that hits
that's called the
home.
M&M. That's
Yeah.
that's called the M&M doctrine.
That
You got to lose yourself.
exactly. I came to the world, and I want to be respectful of your time. I know we'll wrap up soon, but I came into the world of psychedelics the exact same. I found myself, and I thought this was it, and obviously young and free, and then sort of lost it. And now there's this, again, going back to it, now there's this remembering coming back, and that
Mm-hmm.
San Pedro ceremony was an intention to do it ceremonially for the first time, because I wanted to respect the medicine and not do it in a party
Very
setting.
important.
Exactly, and not do it in a party setting. And I tell
Yeah.
everyone now, I tell friends and family and stuff, is that I had the San Pedro, and I've done a mushroom. The mushrooms were calling me to do it in a ceremonial setting to respect the medicine, and that had a
Yeah.
huge impact on me the last few years. So I love
Yeah.
the
I
way you
might go back
articulate
to
that.
I might go back to mushrooms. I think mushrooms are
Mm.
a sort of low impact,
Mm-hmm.
high yield. Um, I resonate with mushrooms somehow, and I've
Mm.
never done them ceremonially, and I think that could be interesting. So I'm not done with psychedelics by any means.
Mm.
Um, but just keeping it real. Be honest with yourself.
Mm.
Who am I being? How am I using this?
Mm.
And yeah, I can't stress enough that the ceremonial traditions, I mean, these are vast, deep networks of intelligence, these indigenous ways of knowing. And indigenous, the word literally means originating from a place.
Mm.
So it comes from a people, a culture that is rooted in a sense of home. which means they're connected with their surroundings and they understand the ways of this ecosystem and this biosphere. And we've lost that. We're totally denatured. And it takes a lot of humility um, and unlearning a lot of things to open oneself to that. But ceremonial contexts provide a container in which there is meaning built into it. It's not just some random drug experience. It's and that can include synthetic substances like MDMA or LSD in a therapeutic setting. That's not exactly ceremonial, but it's intentional.
Yeah.
That's what it has in common, and that you're not alone. You have a guide, and but people find their own way to do things, and I'd say I'm not here to prescribe or judge, prescribe or proscribe any one approach. You have to find your way, and often that's trial and error. Certainly has been for me.
Yeah. Well, Daniel, this was absolutely phenomenal. I connected with so much. So I really appreciate your time. Like I said, I'm sure you're a very busy man, so it means a lot to me. Is there anything else you would like to end off with, or can we
Well, can I plug my website?
go for it? And I'll put all the links
Yeah.
and
So
everything. Yeah.
sure. Yeah. So I mean, if this mental chiropractic thing resonates to anyone listening,
Mm-hmm.
you can go to www.walkwithdaniel.com and just you can read up a little bit more on what it is. And I do like a free 15-minute call with anyone who wants to ask questions about it to see if it's a fit. And yeah, it's something I really enjoy doing. And it's not for everybody and it's not for every situation, but I've found it to be a pretty topically effective, like specifically applied. I've helped a lot of people get unstuck, and I enjoy doing that. And it's a very nice uh, complement or counterbalance to my self-absorbed artist life, where I'm alone at the piano and trying to write a song. Like I'm there with somebody else, applying my language skills and my intuition to someone else's situation, and I love it. I love the moment when someone gets free and clear, where something that seemed just like a fucking slog, and just I love that moment where it's like, oh, yeah,
It's that satisfying click that happens that
that
gives you that release.
exactly. It's like
There we go.
it's like that's something snaps into place. So yeah, so I just invite anyone to check it on out if they're so inclined.
Awesome.
And the Myth of Normal, available now from Amazon. I assume you can order it from the South African version of Amazon if
Yeah,
you guys have one.
I've just started diving into it. I'm really excited to dig my heels into it for sure.
Great. Well, read it in good health.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Josh. Take care.